The Sustainable Voice, bringing you big successes from small places worldwide.
Welcome back to The Sustainable Voice. This is Ashish and Lee. How's it going?
It's going great. I'm really excited about today.
I am too. So we have a special guest on. You want to introduce this special guest and who she is and what we're going to be talking about?
Yes, this is my fabulous daughter, Caroline. So proud of her. Recent Clemson graduate. And we're here today to talk about world citizen. We're still talking about raising world citizens. So I'm glad she can be with us.
Welcome, Caroline.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
This is going to be a lot of fun. Those of you who've been watching and a lot of you have been listening and watching, whether it's on YouTube or listening on Spotify or on any of the devices at home, you have probably heard Lee talk about her daughters. And we've also, in our episode that we did on Powerful Women, the first part, we talked about Lee as a mother and the amazing job she did raising Caroline, you and your sister. So you're a testament to know that we weren't actually kidding around. Your mom is pretty amazing.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree.
Oh, stop.
So, do you know, in all the years we've done this together, I've yet to see Lee evoke that kind of emotion. So thank you, Caroline. You should come on more often. We got to get your mom to be goofy more often. We like her when she's goofy.
I love it when she's goofy. Yeah.
Caroline brings it out. Yeah.
There you go. All right, Caroline, come back frequently. So we're going to be talking about world citizens. Now, we have done podcast episodes on children and travel. We have done episodes on what it's like to travel and how many vacation days we have with our kids. We've done episodes about family travel. This is a slight twist. This is actually going to be bringing in twists. And this is a multi-part series that we're going to be doing on this topic. And Caroline, you're starting us off. And I think it's so important that you're here because you're a testament to this. Can you share with everybody, when we talk about you traveling as a kid and the stuff you've done, has it helped you become the person you are? And if so, how? Let's start off with that question.
Yeah, I would say definitely. My sister and I, we flew unaccompanied minor since I was 8 years old. And growing up in that environment and learning how to do certain airport skills by yourself, which seems small, were very big for an 8-year-old. And, growing up through that life, it made me more confident in myself, my capabilities, and allowed me to do even bigger things like study abroad or go move to Alaska by myself. And I felt confident in those activities just because of the foundation that was laid then.
When you went to Clemson, when you were in class and you were, of course, among a lot of peers, did you feel like you had a leg up on everybody at any point during your education?
I mean, in certain instances, I feel like we all have a leg up on each other because for every opportunity that I had, someone else had a different opportunity that I could be envious of. But in myself, my experience, I felt confident in the work that I was producing for Clemson because I had a lot of writing background and, looking at observational skills I had gained from travel. So I knew the quality of work I was producing was
observational skills. You mean people watching?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Lee, I'm going to bring you in here. Your daughter just said observational skills. Did she get the people watching skills from you, or is this her own trait?
This might be her own thing. She's kind of always been the one that's tuned into different people. And so, yeah, she got her degree in psychology. So she's definitely.
We're going to have some fun today, Caroline. All right. Good. Observational skills. Do tell.
Yeah, so I think that it started with minute things, of course, when you're young and traveling as to, do I have my boarding pass? And small things like that, or looking at the airport, going up to the sign and making sure your plane's on time. And once you learn these foundational things and feel comfortable in that, you can start to observe the world around you a bit in terms of this family looks like they're in a rush, and they're probably in a rush because they didn't get to the airport on time. And so you start making these connections of learning from others' actions while you're out and about versus this family looks perfect and together, and I'm observing the way that they're acting in this airport. I want to be like that. And so modeling yourself from others' behavior.
So you're finding basically a model family and saying that you want to behave like them.
Yeah. And I think that as kids and we're growing up and learning, everything is an experiment for us. And so we learn by doing, right? And I'm going to learn that if I act all frantic in the airport, I'm going to feel frantic and it's going to affect my entire travel experience versus when I act composed and I'm together and I have all these things, I'm having an amazing travel experience.
So you are going to prove a theory that Clemson actually, your alma mater, actually wrote, which is called the meaningful learning theory. And this was part of their study. So I've got a bunch of notes here because there's so many studies here. And what's amazing about when we talk about world citizens is there are arguments on both sides. The arguments on one side that say that travel doesn't have a benefit, that doesn't show a benefit to education, a side that says that it does. But what I found amazing was that every single study agreed on one thing. It doesn't matter when it was done, whether it was 20 years ago or 20 months ago. And it doesn't matter who did it and which way they leaned politically. It doesn't matter where they were. But they all agreed that travel actually enhanced social skills. And I think you put it best. It's not social skills, it's observational skills. Looking at a family, as you said, the way they interact and saying, I want to assimilate to that. I want to be like that. Your mom and I talked about, Lee, you and I have talked about it was difficult growing up, and the fact that you did an amazing job with these two girls, and you have a story to tell. That yours was not an upbringing that was just candy and roses every day, and there were challenging times, and you saw through it. And I find it so impressive and also interesting that in that moment where you're at a boarding pass, and there's a million different things that could probably stress you out, from the flight being delayed to all these people you don't know to this large airport. You chose to use that moment to see how a family communicates and how they're interacting and saying, I want that. And you're kind of setting a moral compass for yourself of what you want it to be. Can you expand more on when you saw that family and what that looked like? What happened?
Well, I think that as all families do when we travel, it can be a very hectic experience. And as I'm sure for young kids, it's doubled on. But when you look and see other individuals who are having the exact same experience as you physically, but internally they're having a very different experience, and it's very pleasurable, and they're laughing and they're enjoying themselves, and they can because they've created an environment in which they can enjoy themselves. It's something that I felt envious of. I can be very stressed out in the airport in general, and so travel is a stressful experience. And when you see other people, and of course you want to model their behavior after them, it's an interesting feeling internally because it's a direct way you want to change. You're seeing exactly how you want to become, and you see the way to do it. And so it's a great opportunity, I felt, to learn and grow and become a great traveler.
So this is interesting. So I want to read to you what Clemson, your alma mater, wrote as meaningful travel theory and meaningful learning theory, excuse me. And you know what? For all we know, Lee, the amount of listeners we've been adding, who knows? Maybe some of your alumni from Clemson are listening right now. So by the way, before I read this, if anybody from Clemson is listening, what do you want to tell them?
First, I'd love to say go Tigers. But as they know, Clemson is a very unique cultural experience in of itself. A lot of it's not even a small college, but it's in a very small town, but it has this population of 30,000 students. And so there's so many amazing cultures on campus. It's a unique experience I loved, and I'm sure that our listeners loved. And so in that, we bond a lot internationally. I always wear my Clemson alumni ring because when I go to other countries, it gets recognized. And so it's really amazing. And the alumni is great. But yeah, so I guess hi to all the listeners. And it's great to be Clemson Tiger family with you.
So here's what Clemson wrote about the meaningful learning theory. The concept that what is learned during experiences can be applied to future experiences and built upon. Pretty much exactly as you described. So you saw that family. And this is important because when we talk about world citizens, Lee, we've always talked about world citizens like, okay, let's go abroad and let's see all these different places here, right? We've talked about your history as in the expedition ship world, the Coast Guard, and the world you've seen. And we've talked about how we can make the world better. We haven't talked about the effect and what Caroline's talking about, the effect of what you see just in the nature of traveling that has and the impact it has on you, right? So Lee, any thoughts on what you hear your amazing daughter talking about right now?
The first thought that popped into my head and tying into that, whether you're traveling abroad or not, is that the girls would always come back and tell me about the people they met, because they would talk, usually as an unaccompanied minor, you're put beside an airline employee if they have one available, or something like that. So they've sat beside pilots and businessmen and people who have traveled the world. And those, I think, Caroline, I love it when you come home and tell me about the different people you've met and the influence they've had on you. So I think that even if at a young age you're not traveling abroad and seeing other cultures, you are absorbing that from others who have done that. And yeah, she had some she's met some very interesting people on her flights.
Well, and you were going to say experiences, and I think you hit something on the head, that being a world citizen, yes, is about seeing the world, but it's about understanding the world and about understanding other cultures, being tolerant, and I use that word loosely because I had somebody, I think probably, it was probably right around Election Day, talk about being tolerant of other cultures. And I just stopped them and I said, let's remove politics from this completely. And I said, what does that actually mean? And, he was Caucasian. I'm, of course, not. And so basically said, well, we need to be tolerant of other cultures. And I said, what does that mean? And he goes, well, just what it means. I go, no, seriously, what does that mean? He goes, why do you ask? I said, if you talk about being tolerant of other cultures, I have a follow-up question. He goes, what's that? I go, which culture came first? He goes, what do you mean? I said, is it me being tolerant of your culture because my culture came first, or you being tolerant of me because your culture came first? Is that how we're basing this? What does the word tolerant mean?
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing? That we're basically now starting to put a pecking order of which culture came first and said, okay, I'm XYZ culture. I came first. So I'm going to be tolerant of every single culture that came after me. Not quite. What does that actually mean? It's not, the word isn't tolerant. The word is understanding.
Right.
I'm not tolerant of other
tolerant
cultures.
Means you put up with something.
Exactly.
Right?
Can we, Lee, I'm going to ask you, can we read off the definition, the official definition of the word tolerant?
Yes. Give me a minute.
Let's read that off. Caroline, your mom's really smart, by the way.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But I do think it's interesting that I'm sure you found in your travels, as I found in mine, the connotation of words and how we use them towards other individuals. And, I think that it also impacts us internally. The words we use shape who we are.
Absolutely.
With others.
Absolutely. Okay. So while your mom's looking this up, let's talk about experiences. What is one experience that you had as a world citizen that you'll never forget, that you believe fully shaped who you are becoming and who you will be?
So this experience happened more recently and is a little bit more far out, but I had studied abroad in Spain for 4 months, and I'm very grateful for that experience. And while I was there during that 4 months, I volunteered at a high school in Badalona. It's called, and I'm going to pronounce this very poorly because it's in Catalan instead of Spanish, but it's called Institut La Llauna. And it's a high school there for ages 12 to 18. And I was an English language teaching assistant, and I just ended up questioning my own philosophy on life while being there, because the students were asking me the most amazing questions. And instead of asking, what was it like to grow up with prom, or, what's your favorite food? They were asking, what do you think it means to be a patriot? And they were looking at me and they're saying, did you feel uncomfortable standing for the Pledge of Allegiance every day? Because they don't do that. And ended up making me look back on my own experience and say, well, how did this make me feel? And how am I the person I am now? And it was really amazing learning from all the individuals there.
So how is that actually shaped? And this is the part of it that I'm really interested in hearing. That experience, because I think Lee, you told me about her being in Spain for a few months, and I thought that was impressive. First of all,
sí, un poco.
Sí, un poco. Habla español. ¿Habla español de España o español de América Sur?
España.
España. Habla España. ¿Cómo está?
Estoy muy bien.
Perfecto. Qué buenísimo.
Gosh, yeah.
So let's talk about this real quick. So this is a pretty cool experience. And it's interesting how they were asking you not about American pop culture. They were asking you, indirectly about politics, but they were asking you about basically stuff that's nature to us, certain second nature to us that isn't for them. And is that because they were trying to be like you, to emulate you, or is that because they were trying to draw a contrast?
I think that the world has watched a lot of America as a world leader. And so as we have a lot of different political and sociocultural changes, I think that having someone from the United States who has been living through that, they were just curious as to how that's impacted me as a person.
Got it.
Yeah.
So how has that impacted you as a person? And I see that because what I would love to know is, as you now start your life as a professional, as you are, I guess your education career is now complete, or are you going for secondary degrees?
I just actually have been accepted to graduate school. So
congratulations.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Where are you going for graduate school?
I was accepted to Western Washington University.
Very cool. And what are we going to be studying?
Sports and performance psychology.
Okay. You and I have to talk offline because this is a really cool topic. You and I. So you're basically going to be helping athletes achieve greatness, in essence.
And it's not just athletes, but anyone who has a high performance job. So I currently have an internship with the Navy, and I'll be helping their pilots and their performance in planes, or it's with musicians and on stage that I could work with if I wanted to at this degree.
All right. So now I think you're answering my question with an exclamation mark, which is fantastic. I think best decision I've made all year is asking Lee to have you on this show.
Thank you.
Best decision all year, more than anything else. Don't tell my son I said that. So let's talk about this. You're interning, you're going to graduate school. So there's a book called The Greatness Code. I'm not sure if you've read it. The author of this book is who helped Tim Duncan on the Spurs, among others, and whatnot. And so I've read this book, and it's interesting there. But what I wanted to ask you is this path that you chose, interning with the Navy, going towards the graduate field you're going to, and the really acute field that you want to enter within the psychology realm, with high-performing individuals and high-performing job sets. Within that, can you actually find a way to connect that to your experiences? And how would you draw that line?
So we'll go back to the high school in Spain, and I found that I was questioning a lot of myself and my moral philosophy. And I think it was a great experience because you always should question yourself. You should always question the decisions you make. Why did I make this decision? And if I don't feel confident in that answer, it's a great time for me to go back and reflect on myself as a person and how I've developed and my experiences previously. And so with this decision to go to graduate school specifically for sports and performance psychology, I look back on every experience I've had. Studying in Spain, I took a health psychology class from a woman who grew up in Argentina, and she was sharing all these amazing experiences about how health psychology has impacted herself and her clients. And we go back to me when I worked in Alaska and seeing how working on boats is a high performance in of itself, because you have to be mentally turned on all the time, whether it's for 2 hours or 12 hours. And my experience as an athlete, living in a small town and being an athlete, how that impacted me and how I still achieved and wanted to perform well, even if maybe my competition wasn't as vast as if I lived in a big city. And so reflecting on these experiences and seeing where I wanted to go in life, I found that they all really built upon one another. And because some were positive and some were negative, I found that I grew most as a person in these experiences, and I wanted to continue growing. And so that's why I made that decision.
So it's interesting you use the word reflect. Lee, how do you feel listening to your daughter take over the world?
I'm so proud of her. I am, and as a parent, all I really cared about is that my kids are kind and healthy and that's it. But, and the rest of it just have to get out of their way and let them find their way. So I'm just proud of her.
You're killing it, Caroline.
She's killing it.
Thank you.
You're killing it. So it's interesting you use the word reflect, because I want to read you the second part of the study that Clemson did, which is called the experiential learning theory. So you get the meaningful learning theory, which is that the concept that is learned during experiences can be applied to future experiences built upon. So here is the experiential learning theory, and everything you describe. And this is why I asked you that question about connecting it, because you just illustrated this study. You pretty much just proved this study to be absolutely true. Experiential learning theory says where knowledge and skills are learned through a process of doing something, reflecting about it, and applying it to future experiences. You just embodied it.
Yeah.
This study was done in 2015, I want to say, and it's still true today, and you're a testament to it.
Yeah.
So congratulations on your success, by the way.
Thank you.
So I got to ask you the very important question. How are your grades?
My grades, they were good. I made the dean's list or the president's list most semesters, but nowhere close to as achieving as my sister. And I think that for me, academics were important and sitting down with a book and studying was important, but going out and having those experiences were just as important. So I learned from being in the classroom, and I'm also a rock climber and a whitewater kayaker, and I learned from those experiences similar things to what I was learning in the classroom, specifically about, mental performance and things like that. And so, I had a B or a C every now and then, but to be honest with you, but I really would take those B's and C's to have the life that I've had over the past few years.
Yeah, you know what? That's so well said. And I'll tell you why. I want to read you a couple of things. So, Lee, we found a quote from David Rockefeller, didn't we?
We
found
did.
A quote. Do you want to read off that quote? Because I think that applies to you completely, Caroline.
Yep. Let me find it.
It was pretty cool.
It was
cool. We're like, what? He
said here
this?
It is. David Rockefeller, this was from an interview with Forbes. He declared, "I am a passionate traveler, and from the time I was a child, travel informed me as much as my formal education." Which actually, I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I will never forget one of the girls. I think the girls both had the same kindergarten teacher, but Isabel was first with her. And I remember her saying to me, travel is great and all, but you really have to make sure your kids are coming to school, and I just remember bristling at that because she was only missing like 2 days of school. But I remember just being really agitated about that because in my mind, that was just as important as what she was learning in school.
So it's interesting you say that because this was something that I wanted to talk about today as well, because the concept of world citizen it's polarizing. I can't believe it. I mean, I've yet to find a topic in our global society that is not polarizing. I mean, even if it's obvious, it's still somebody finds a way to make it polarizing. So I want to basically show you. So there was a study that was done that basically said that the greater reading and math scores of an increase that, when they started seeing those increases in grades, it was about a 1% increase by the third grade. But then there was an opposite study that basically said that they couldn't find a correlation to grades. They found a correlation to social skills, but not to grades. And that's because the sample size wasn't big enough. And so you have two separate spectrums, right, that say this. So you have one study that says that by the third grade, they started seeing a 1% increase. And the 1% increase was specifically in math and reading. That's what they measured, right? So we're talking about basically, SAT scores, ACT scores. We're talking about standardized testing and the average national scores from there. So it went sideways. Like you had one spectrum saying, no, it doesn't affect the grades. And then you had one spectrum says, no, it does affect the grades, but it starts affecting it from third grade. And the more you do it, the greater the impact is. What that tells us, what you just said, Lee, is that, there are educators and the system, and I don't blame the teachers, but it's the system that basically says, the old adage that, no, you have to come to school. You have to make sure you're there. And it's I remember when my children were younger, we had a teacher in elementary school and whatnot, very standardized, and at one point was trying to diagnose my son with ADD because he was already doing things. For example, I remember he came home with his math homework and this teacher wrote, "He's not understanding. You need to sit with your child. He's not very good at math. He's not understanding it." I looked at this paper. Every answer was off by 1. So we started going through it. Today, math is his favorite subject. He's basically in advanced physics and whatnot, and it's his favorite topic. So, Caroline, a question to you. Did that, with what your mom's talking about, as you were going through school, was there a teacher or a system that you said it's very standard? He feels too standardized. It feels like I'm in a box, like I'm locked in a room with 4 walls, and I'm not actually allowed to be creative.
Yeah, there was. And I have a great story to add on to that.
Yeah.
I was at a very standard, American high school with you have 4 quarters and you sit in those classes. And I just found myself, I feel like I'm a high achieving student, but I found myself staring at the clock because I just couldn't hold attention. It's not because I have ADD or ADHD or anything like that, but I think the mundane of the day, every single day doing a very similar thing while it can be helpful for a lot of students, it's not helpful for every student. And I think that as we grow, we learn through experience and by doing. And so lectures are great and they're very important, but it's also really important to get out there and do things hands-on. And so halfway through my high school career, I ended up transferring to a high school called the South Carolina Governor's School for Science and Math. It's a residential high school, and it's a free boarding school, I guess I should say. And they focus a lot on those hands-on experiences. And I found that I was enjoying school a lot more because I was able to really see my learning in the real world. They have a month dedicated to just taking a break and understanding the world called interim. So during that month, students will travel to Spain and Portugal or Peru, or I stayed local and I just hiked through South Carolina with teachers. But our professors, as they hiked, they would explain the science of the things around us.
Oh,
that really helped me understand my world on a nature walk through a public park or through a mountain range nearby. And so myself and the other students on these experiences, I think that it really helped us develop to be, high school graduates in the sense of we're developed as a person and we're developed academically.
It's interesting you say that because there's the studies that were showing this, from Penn State to Michigan State said what you're talking about, about the fact that the experiential impact, the experiential theory. So I want to share with you a similar, and we're going to have my son on the second part of this series. So he'll explain to you. But I remember, so he's also my children both go to public school. I actually want them to be in the public system because I want them to understand what life is like where we are, right? I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to private or public school. That's each individual choice. But something amazing happened, right? So my son can still name the teachers that impacted his life in the best way. And one of the cool things is he joined this engineering club, which is the experiential thing you're talking about. I was talking to his professor. Just, my son was giving a talk, but I think he was giving a talk. Yeah, it was Kennedy Space Center. He was giving a talk on very low Earth orbit satellite use. Something that was, I looked at saying I wasn't doing that at 17. This is incredible.
And he's amazing, by the way. I watched his speech.
Thank you. It was basically a proud dad moment. The professor was talking to me about this thing called CubeSat technology. So in essence, in the very near future, school districts, public or private, are going to be able to take science experiments. Like, when you were in school, you had this experiment where you basically would put, moss on a rock or something in an enclosed system to see how it would grow or you see if algae grows. Imagine taking that same experiment and putting it into a slot in a satellite that's shot up in space.
Wow.
And that same experiment is done in this little rented space. And it's basically publicizing, or it's basically making it more accessible to public the use of space exploration and space research. So it's what you're talking about, Caroline, the fact that you're doing, the fact that you're actually understanding more because you're doing. I want to share this study called the Travel Effect Project with you. So the U.S. Travel Association actually commissioned this study with a bunch of different research universities and research centers to be able to put together this study. And they went a different approach, right? So every time we saw studies done, whether it was through Michigan State, Clemson, Penn State, they kept talking at the schools. They kept going to schools. Now, there's a reason why that David Rockefeller quote is so important, right? And why what he said is so important. The Travel Effect Project actually took 2,500 adults that traveled as a child, that traveled as children across the U.S., right? And asked all of them about travel. And what they basically said is that it gave them higher scores, and their median income was 12% higher than the normal median income for their counterparts, specifically because of how much they traveled as children. And they were able to correlate it, right? So, Caroline, this applies to you because you're talking about not just a psychology field, but you're going to graduate school to have an extremely narrow focus on high-achieving individuals, high-achieving job sets, high-achieving individuals, high-achieving athletes, whatever the case may be. And what you're doing with the Navy, specifically with the pilots. I mean, it speaks to that, right? I'm not talking about the money side of it as much as I'm talking about the fact that you would be one of the 2,500. You're representative of this 2,500 to say, because of my experiences as a world citizen, whether you travel the world, whether you travel within the US, whether you do something, but as long as it's something hands-on, as long as it is experiential, as long as it is a meaningful learning, as long as that's there, as long as those concepts are there, there's a direct correlation to how you're going to do as an adult, the impact you're going to have as an adult in terms of your decision-making skills and in terms of what you do as an outcome. So my question to you, Caroline, you went into school for psychology and you talked about the connection to how you decided to go this route with high achievers. How is it going with the Navy? What is there a story that you can share with the Navy that is a great example of what the travel effect project is?
I would love to. I will be starting actually next week. So
we're going to have you back.
Any stories quite yet, but I will get back to you on that for sure.
All right, we're going to have you back there. Okay, so then in that case, let's go to the application process. Why the Navy?
So my sister is stationed down here. She's in the Air Force base. I guess she's in the Air Force, but she's on the naval base. And so I was very interested in how these individual, she's being trained like an athlete. She's a CISO, so she'll be the backseater in the plane, but they're working with extremely expensive machinery. They have to be mentally turned on the entire time. And as well as that, not only just mentally turned on, but their focus is shifting every 5 seconds to something else. And they have to be completely aware of their surroundings. And so I was very curious about the kind of mental pressure that contains. What kind of anxiety do you have before you get on this plane, and how do you mitigate that so you can still feel confident in yourself and do a good job without letting all of the pressure of this plane's so expensive and I could lose my job in the Air Force or in the Navy if I am not performing as high as they would like me to be, and still perform well and pass those barriers.
So it's interesting. And obviously, so she's a backseater, but she's still going at, 4 or 5 Gs up in the sky, obviously.
I honestly don't know much about planes, but yes, very fast and all of that.
So when you were doing this, when you were studying, obviously, and getting ready for this path, have you had any experience with high achievers? I know you're one, but was there an experience with a high achiever, or any kind of a study that you read that said, this is where I belong?
I think that, like we were talking about, it was a lot of learning by doing. And I read plenty of studies that talk about how, mental imagery impact how you perform later on, and, positive self-talk impact how you walk through the world. But it wasn't until I was physically doing it. I was rock climbing and my leg wouldn't stop shaking. And there was a person yelling at me from above, "Oh, that's cognitive dissonance. Your brain and your body aren't communicating super well right now, and that's why your leg is shaking. Just take a second to breathe and then keep climbing." And, I'm outside on the side of a cliff and I am like, I don't want to hear psychology right now. I would love to not be hanging on the side of a cliff. And so reflecting on that experience, I was super intrigued. And then I get to whitewater kayaking and I'm thinking about these studies that I don't think really were triggered right in the moment of reading them. But now I'm having a lot of positive self-talk while I'm paddling through a rapid, because if I'm not thinking clearly and confident in myself, I'm going to get injured. And so I think it was more of the connection between the studies and the experience than just the study itself that made me certain of it.
So I just had a vision in my head. You're going to appreciate this vision. Marathons, New York Marathon, Chicago Marathon, the last quarter mile, that's when the bodies are breaking down. There's Kara on the sidelines. "Oh, your legs aren't working because your brain's not communicating with your leg too well. This is why you're not able to run. It's okay. You'll be fine. The shakes will go away. Just get up and keep going. You're almost there. You're going to collapse, and then you're going to collapse when you get past the finish line, but this is why it's happening," whatnot. And I'm just picturing this. And in all seriousness, I'm just thinking about this because you see these guys that just start shaking and whatnot. Now, look, I'm from Kenya. We're the capital of marathon runners. Mm-hmm. And you see these guys, and I went to school with some of these guys even when I was in college here in the US, and the way they would train, they would just associate that I'm exhausted. But what you're saying is it's not that they're exhausted. It's because there's a communication breakdown between the brain and the nervous system.
Yeah, well, in some instances, like for example, like sometimes you have a muscle that is uncontrollably shaking when you're doing something very hard. And so I've also been a runner previously, and that I think is more of just a self-talk. It is 90% mental, 10% physical. You can train all you want, but if you're not pushing yourself internally to be better, your body is not going to physically carry you there.
This is amazing. I wanna close with two things. I want to talk about when Lee, you and I have talked about this. So I am a self-professed Swiftie. I'm sorry to admit it. My 13-year-old daughter turned me into a Swiftie.
I'm a Swiftie too. I totally get it.
Yeah. Anybody who disagrees, who says, "Oh my God, I'm the problem. It's me."
That was perfect. That should be the tagline for this.
So here's why I think this is so important. So and I think I shared this with you, Lee. There was a study done, Inc. magazine published it, but there was a study done, I believe, by Yale University. I want to say, I'm not 100% sure, but it talked about the neuroscience behind her concerts. And the neuroscience behind her concerts, that the fact that it was basically the greatest collection of happiness that the world's ever seen. And what they talked about was, they took kids, and I tried this on my daughter, and it's true. People who went to the concert, if you ask them, the kids specifically, and my daughter is now 13, but if you ask them about the set list, they'll remember, they know all the words, but they may not remember all the songs she played. It was a 3.5-hour concert. So may not remember all the songs. There were 44 songs there. But you ask about the stitch pattern on a bodysuit. You ask about the color of a dress, or about the sparkles on one cheek, or a specific action. They remember every single detail. And the retention of information was on a different level. So I tried this on my daughter. I tried this on her friends. And sure enough, it's absolutely true. And what this article talked about, and perhaps, Caroline, you would be able to chime in on this as well, was that the retention of information for subjects you may not like, we don't all like math, right? The retention of information on subjects you don't like. This could have been an example of how children are actually retaining information to what you're talking about, right? Doing. If I put you into a classroom and talk to you about the table of elements, you'd probably be looking at your ass going, oh, here comes, okay, yes, Fe is this symbol, NaCl is this, and okay. But the fact that you're out and doing, I think it's the same thing, right? That you're experiencing something that is allowing you to retain information because you're physically experiencing it.
Yeah. And I think I completely agree with that. And I think a lot of the psychological concepts that I can just give you back to back right now, if we sit here, is because I've done them in application, or I've seen them in application. And it's not just, the lecture, it's the experience, like what you're talking about, that really reinforces that memory in us. Yeah,
100%. So I'd like to close by sharing a quote from Mark Twain, which, Lee, we found that quote too, didn't we?
Yeah.
So if we can find that quote, because I thought, what gets a podcast if you're not quoting Mark Twain?
I know, Mark Twain, of course. Okay, so here he is. Individuals have a broader understanding of the way things are, rather than the myopic outlook that can develop from vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime. So get out of your little bubble.
That's right. Pop the bubble and go.
Pop the bubble and expose yourself to people who have traveled, even if you haven't. Expose yourself to people who've had world experiences.
That's right. And the word isn't tolerant. The word is understanding.
That's right.
The word is appreciating.
That's right. Tolerant is showing a willingness to allow the existence of opinions or behavior that one does not necessarily agree with.
That is an excellent way to end this podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Caroline, thank you for joining us. We hope to have you back soon.
Thank you for having me so much. This was great.
Lee, as always, it was great. And to all of our listeners, this is what we're talking about. To all of our listeners, if you want to be the best version of yourself, start looking in the mirror. Make that change. Make what you want it to be. Make it out to what you want it to be. Take care.
Thank you for listening to The Sustainable Voice. If you have a success story of your own, please reach out and share it with us. We'd love to hear from you. See you next time.